I guess I can tell you the story of how I got involved with major spoilers. So I was working in Kansas for PBS, right? That's that job that took me up and down the state over and over again. One of the things that PBS did, or that station did, is it worked on shows with the local university. A lot of PBS stations like belong to the university, or rather, the university stations have that PBS branding, but we weren't tied to the university, but we still did stuff with them because they were a great resource, obviously, universities are, and a good place to find volunteers and everything. I was working with this guy, or my general manager was this guy who was really terrible. He's the guy who kind of slapped me once. That's a different story. That's in another stream. Also, that story is probably not gonna end up. It's not gonna end up on YouTube as its own clip, but you'll have to go and find like the full stream where I tell that story if you haven't heard it. Long before that guy ever slapped me, he was still a very annoying person, and at the time, Steven Schleicher was the head of the communications department, which was like their TV and film department. I don't know if communications is what it was called. Me and Scroll Brian, not D&D Brian, but Scroll Brian, a different Brian, would go do a show. So we would usually, Scroll Brian would direct, and I would do graphics, and Steven would do sound, right? And so and we would use Fort Hayes kids as cheap labor. They got school credit for it. Lagna says, "Oh man, I thought the story about Rodrigo joining major spoilers involved more rain, trench coats, and dead drops." No, unfortunately not. It's still, I think it's still a cute story. Scroll Brian and Steven already knew each other, and they were both very nerdy. They went to school together, to the same school that Steven was now working at. Very quickly, Steven and I also hit it off because we would like to talk about comics and movies and all this stuff, right? That terrible boss would very frequently be there for the shows. Almost always he was there for the shows because he liked to schmooze with the host and with the doctors, right? Just loved it, loved it, loved it, loved it. Loved to be like hobnobbing it. So that's why he would go. But he would get there, before the doctors got there when we were there setting things up. So he would come over and talk to us, and it was insufferable. So one day, he was hovering over us, and we started talking about, I want to say the Green Goblin. I want to say the initial conversation was about the Green Goblin. And we would talk, and we just started talking about comic books and comic book superheroes and stuff. And he didn't know anything about that. And he would like get a word in every once in a while, but like even he, with his like complete lack of social acumen, could tell that he he wasn't bringing anything to the conversation. And also, it bored him. It wasn't something that he wanted to talk about. And this happened a couple of times, and after a couple of times, I'd like to say that it was me, because pretty sure it was me, but I was very sensitive to to that guy, to my boss. He made me angry all the time, and I would take very large pains to avoid him, to figure out ways that I didn't have to talk to him. To he always wanted to have his thumbprint on everything we did. Like he was very micromanaging. So I developed ways of like tricking him into like approving a project without me actually having to change too many things. So I'd like to think that it was me who initially realized, hey, when we talk about comics, this guy leaves. And the other guys were like, "Oh yeah." And so we started talking about comics all the time, comics and pop culture stuff, which he wasn't following, right? He would always come over and try to talk to me about Grey's Anatomy. And I'd be like, "Dude, I'm not watching Grey's Anatomy." Like I'd be like, "Okay, but I don't know who these characters are." Also, it seems really weird when he says like McSteamy or whatever. Just Buh. Anyway, and so we had a good time because A, we were scaring off that guy, and B, we realized it was actually lots of fun for the three of us to sit around and talk about comics and pop culture stuff. And so Steven was like, we're going to start a podcast. And here's the thing, obviously, a lot of my life has been greatly improved by major spoilers. I enjoy being part of major spoilers. Critical Hit is basically my magnum opus. It's the largest, most long running project I have ever worked on, and I'm very appreciative to major spoilers and to Steven for basically letting me do whatever I want. On that day, when I was like, yeah, sure, let's start a podcast, whatever, I had recently graduated from college and had dealt with mostly flakes. All of my classmates that were ever like, let's start a project, had at some point flaked on me or seemed glad for me to flake on them, right? We would start a project and we'd be like, this is hard, and then we'd stop. So I was like, okay, this guy, we're going to record a couple episodes, and then he's going to be like, this is hard, we're not going to do it, right? So here I am, like more than a decade later, still working for major spoilers, right? It was fateful. It was a momentous occasion in definitely Steven and my lives, because even if you don't talk about my influence on major spoilers, it's where the MSP started, and the MSP is where all of our other podcasts have spawned from. Critical Hit, Zach on Film, Top 5, basically they all started as offshoots of the Major Spoilers podcast. Eventually, Scroll Brian couldn't make it anymore. That's when Steven tracked down Matthew and invited him to be part of the show. Probably is a little bit anticlimactic. You know, there wasn't any like rooftop fights or anything like that. Nobody drove a car over a ramp and crossed any ravines or anything. But I think it's funny that at its core, from the beginning, the Major Spoilers was this defense mechanism to annoy my boss. It's one of those things where it's like you just never know. You never know where something's going to take you. You never know when like you trying to just like spend some time not being like victimized by your boss's lack of like human interaction and stupidity and micromanaging can actually become something else, and something good and something interesting and something that is worthwhile, you know, even after all these years. That is the story of how I joined Major Spoilers and how the Major Spoilers podcast started. Definitely, the 10 years I spent in Kansas have made me rich with love and friendship, but definitely not with money. So, if you would like to subscribe to El Picachon, or drop me some bits, or better yet, do a donation, scroll down to get that donation button, I will be eternally grateful to you. See how I did that? See how I spun that? First, I get you caring about me and about my situation, about my loved ones, and then I kabam hit you with the hard sell. Who could stand a chance? Oh, also, if you're watching this on YouTube later, you can like and subscribe, or you can look me up on Twitter and do my coffee as well. That's right. That's me. I am that guy.